The Nexus galaxy was a canvas of celestial marvels. Black holes pirouetted alongside neutron stars, while vibrant nebulae swirled in hues of violet and gold. Amid this breathtaking expanse, one name inspired awe and terror: the Kh'zix, apex predators of the known universe. And among them, Kh'zix was a legend. His crystalline exoskeleton gleamed like obsidian glass under starlight, refracting colors in dazzling patterns. Neural processors far beyond the capacity of quantum computers enabled him to think faster, strategize better, and strike with unerring precision. His sensory organs could detect a heartbeat from miles away, while his 8-foot frame radiated menace. For millennia, he had hunted the most formidable prey in existence, collecting trophies from beasts and warriors that had once been deemed unconquerable. And yet, he was bored. The Dryan elk beast lay motionless at his feet. Its once majestic antlers snapped like twigs. Kh'zix cleaned his claws with surgical precision, the task more habit than necessity. He stared at the shimmering void through his ship's viewport, his mandibles twitching in frustration. Another hunt. Another disappointment, he muttered, his voice resonating like shards of ice grinding together. The Dryan beast had been hyped as a fearsome predator, but it had lasted barely minutes against him. It had neither cunning nor spirit, and Kh'zix longed for a quarry that would test him. The thrill of the chase had become a fading echo in his memory. His musings were interrupted by a flicker on his ship's sensors. A stray transmission, weak and barely coherent, from a primitive sector of the galaxy. Normally such signals were beneath his notice, but something about this one held his attention. It wasn't a distress beacon or a declaration of war, it was something else entirely. And next up on Survival Challenge Extreme, our contestants face off against the deadliest predators on Earth. Kh'zix tilted his head, his crystalline frame shifting with curiosity. The transmission was grainy, but it depicted small, bipedal creatures, humans, he realized, armed with rudimentary tools as they squared off against creatures several times their size. A group of them chased a lumbering beast with nothing but sharpened sticks and crude snares. Fascinating. His mandibles clicked rhythmically, an expression of interest among his kind. No natural armor, no claws or venom, fragile skeletons and inferior sensory capabilities, he mused aloud. And yet, they dominate their environment. The more he watched, the more intrigued he became. Humans were absurdly vulnerable: soft skin, inefficient body temperatures, limited stamina. And yet they thrived. They built fires in frozen wastelands, constructed shelters in arid deserts, and wrestled apex predators for survival. One human even subdued a snarling predator by making loud noises and waving a bright cloth. Is this bravery or stupidity? Kh'zix wondered, his neural circuits whirring with analysis. He replayed the footage, this time focusing on the expressions of the humans. They showed no fear, only determination. Their eyes gleamed with a mix of calculation and daring. He noticed how they coordinated their attacks, adjusting their tactics on the fly. These weren't mere creatures surviving by chance. They were strategists. A new sensation stirred in him, one he hadn't felt in centuries: excitement. Kh'zix leaned back in his command chair, his crystalline claws tapping rhythmically on the console. His neural processors worked overtime, compiling every piece of data he could find about this peculiar species. They had no claws, no natural defenses, yet they had mastered fire, flight, and even nuclear energy. They were resourceful, adaptable, and utterly baffling. Either they are the luckiest species in the galaxy, he murmured, his voice a low, crystalline hum, or there is something I have yet to understand. The hunter in him demanded answers. He sifted through planetary data, cross-referencing survival techniques, ecological dominance, and recorded battles. One name kept surfacing: Marcus Carter, a wilderness survival instructor. Kh'zix replayed footage of Marcus teaching a group of humans how to build shelters with nothing but twigs and leaves. Another video showed him calmly explaining how to fend off a bear using big energy and loud shouting. This, Marcus, Kh'zix said, his mandibles spreading in what might have been a smirk. "He'll do." Marcus wasn't just any human. He was a master of his craft, an expert in survival who thrived in the wilderness. Kh'zix felt a rare flicker of anticipation. A human like this would be the ultimate challenge. With a surge of purpose, Kh'zix began to prepare. He selected his most advanced tools: cloaking fields, gravity manipulators, and sensory scramblers. His ship's systems hummed with energy as he set a course for Earth. He studied every detail of Marcus's routines, from his early morning coffee rituals to his evening lectures on fire starting. For 3 weeks, Kh'zix observed his prey from orbit, cloaked and undetectable. He watched as Marcus demonstrated how to navigate treacherous terrain and forage for food. He noted the human's peculiar habits: drinking something called coffee in alarming quantities, casually encountering predators, and laughing in the face of danger. Day 12 of observation, Kh'zix recorded into his log. Subject displays remarkable persistence and resourcefulness. Encountered a bear today. Responded with loud noises and confident gestures. Likely suicidal, but effective. As the days passed, Kh'zix's fascination deepened. Marcus taught groups of less capable humans how to survive in hostile conditions, showing patience even when they failed repeatedly. His lessons were laced with humor, his energy seemingly boundless. Kh'zix couldn't understand why anyone would voluntarily endure discomfort for recreation, but he admired Marcus's tenacity. And then there were the quiet moments. At night, Marcus would sit by his campfire, sipping coffee and staring at the stars. His face was calm, almost contemplative, as if he knew something the universe didn't. "It's almost a shame," Kh'zix murmured, watching the flickering firelight dance on Marcus's features. "Such an intriguing specimen, but the hunt demands it." He scouted the perfect location for his ambush, a narrow valley surrounded by towering cliffs. The terrain was ideal for a hunt, with no escape routes and plenty of cover for his cloaking field. He spent days meticulously setting traps, electromagnetic scramblers to disable Marcus's primitive communication devices, gravity distorters to control the battlefield, and paralysis fields to ensure a clean kill. As dusk fell on the eve of the hunt, Kh'zix stood at the edge of the valley, his crystalline form blending seamlessly into the shadows. The air was crisp and cold, carrying the faint scent of pine. A lone wolf howled in the distance, and he felt a surge of confidence. "Tomorrow," he whispered, his voice resonating in the stillness. "Tomorrow, I will remind the universe why the Kh'zix are the greatest predators." He retreated to his ship, his mind sharp and focused. The stars above twinkled like 1,000 eyes, watching as the hunter prepared for his ultimate challenge. The morning sun rose over the jagged peaks of the Rocky Mountains, casting long shadows across the forested valley. Frost clung to the edges of pine needles, glistening like tiny crystals in the golden light. For most creatures, this was a moment of quiet peace. For Kh'zix, it was the perfect moment to begin his hunt. His cloaked form moved silently along the ridgeline, crystalline feet making no sound against the rocky terrain. Every movement was calculated, every step deliberate. He paused to scan the valley below, his enhanced vision picking up the faintest hints of motion. Marcus Carter, the so-called wilderness survival expert, was making his way toward the narrow pass, completely unaware of the predator stalking him. Kh'zix allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The traps he had spent days preparing were flawless. Electromagnetic scramblers hummed invisibly, ready to sever any connection Marcus might attempt with his primitive devices. Gravity distorters lay hidden beneath the soil, calibrated to disrupt the terrain and funnel the human into a precise kill zone. And if by some miracle Marcus avoided all that, the paralysis fields would ensure Kh'zix had the final move. From his vantage point, he watched Marcus stop to adjust his pack. The human was lean, his movements confident, but unhurried. His brown jacket and cargo pants blended well with the earthy tones of the forest, but to Kh'zix's superior senses, he stood out like a flare in the darkness. Even from this distance, Kh'zix could detect the faint aroma of coffee clinging to him. Still clinging to that neurotoxin, Kh'zix muttered, his voice a low, crystalline rasp. Primitive, yet stubborn. Marcus whistled softly as he walked, his tune carrying across the still air. He paused briefly by a stream, crouching to fill a water bottle, then stood and stretched, glancing at the cliffs as though sensing something. Kh'zix stiffened. Had the human noticed his presence? No, impossible. His cloaking field was active, and his scent dissipated long before it could reach Marcus's inferior olfactory system. The hunter's neural processors whirred, analyzing every detail. The human's posture was relaxed, his breathing steady. No signs of fear, no signs of suspicion. Still, the way Marcus's eyes lingered on the shadows seemed curious. With a silent command, Kh'zix activated the first stage of his plan. The electromagnetic scramblers blinked to life, their fields expanding in concentric waves. Marcus's phone, tucked in the side pocket of his pack, flickered uselessly. The human glanced down at it and frowned. "Guess there's no signal out here," Marcus said aloud, as though speaking to the forest itself. "Good thing I wasn't counting on it." Kh'zix's mandibles clicked with approval. The prey was already accepting its isolation. Step 1, complete. The terrain shifted subtly as the gravity distorters activated. Tiny, imperceptible changes in the landscape guided Marcus further into the valley, toward the ambush point. Kh'zix moved ahead, his cloaked form slipping between the trees like a phantom. The human continued walking, humming to himself as he adjusted his pack. Kh'zix felt the rush of anticipation building within him. He had hunted countless creatures across the galaxy, but there was something uniquely thrilling about this moment. Marcus, for all his resourcefulness, was still a fragile, unarmed human. His defeat was inevitable, yet Kh'zix couldn't deny the excitement coursing through him. It wasn't just a hunt, it was a game, and he always won. As Marcus approached the narrow pass, Kh'zix decloaked. The effect was as dramatic as he intended. One moment, the space before Marcus was empty. The next, an 8-foot crystalline predator stood there, its exoskeleton refracting the sunlight into dazzling shards of color. Kh'zix's towering frame blocked the path, his claws glinting like polished blades. Marcus stopped mid-step, tilting his head to one side. For a moment, the only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. "Well," Marcus said, his voice calm but tinged with curiosity, "you're definitely not local." Kh'zix spread his mandibles in what could almost be described as a grin. "I am Kh'zix," he declared, his voice a resonant hum that seemed to echo off the cliffs. "Greatest hunter of the Kh'zix species, scourge of 17 star systems, your death incarnate." Marcus raised an eyebrow, then took a slow sip from the thermos he had pulled from his pack. "Cool," he said, his tone casual. "Want some coffee?" Kh'zix faltered, his neural processors struggling to process the human's reaction. This was not how prey was supposed to behave. There was no fear, no desperation. Instead, Marcus seemed intrigued. "You misunderstand, human," Kh'zix said, his crystalline claws flexing. "You are my quarry. This encounter ends with your destruction." "Yeah, I figured," Marcus replied, taking another sip. "But you've been stalking me for, 2 weeks now? Seems rude not to offer hospitality." Kh'zix's mandibles clicked in irritation. "You knew I was there?" Marcus grinned. "Oh, sure. Your cloaking tech is good, but it creates a shimmer in the air, kind of like heat waves. And that ozone smell? Dead giveaway." The hunter's pride took its first serious blow. He had been certain his stealth was flawless. How could a primitive creature like this have seen through it? "You've been watching me," Marcus continued, his tone conversational. "That's fine. I watch people all the time, survival instructor and all. But if you're going to try something, you might want to hurry up. I've got a class in a couple of hours." Kh'zix bristled, his crystalline exoskeleton shifting hues in agitation. "You mock me," he growled, taking a menacing step forward. "Do you not understand the danger you face?" "Oh, I understand perfectly," Marcus said, still grinning. "You're a big, scary alien hunter with all the fancy gadgets, but you got one problem." Kh'zix narrowed his glowing eyes. And what is that? Marcus's gaze flicked to the shadows behind Kh'zix. You're not the only one who knows how to set a trap. Before Kh'zix could react, a branch snapped behind him. He spun, sensors flaring to maximum alert, but there was nothing there. By the time he turned back, Marcus was gone. Humans, Marcus's voice echoed from somewhere above, are really good at misdirection. Kh'zix snarled, scanning the area with every tool at his disposal: heat signatures, sound triangulation, even faint electromagnetic pulses. But all he found were conflicting signals. "Enjoy your hunt, big guy," Marcus called, his voice drifting like smoke through the trees. "Welcome to Earth. Hope you packed a lunch." For the first time in centuries, Kh'zix felt the thrill of uncertainty. This was no ordinary hunt, and for the first time he wondered if he had underestimated his prey. Kh'zix's crystalline claws scraped against the rocky ground as he moved through the dense forest, his sensors whirring at full capacity. Every branch that swayed in the wind, every rustle of leaves sent his neural processors into overdrive. The human was here, somewhere, but every clue he found led to nothing: phantom signals, footprints that abruptly ended, heat signatures that flickered and vanished. It was as though the forest itself conspired against him. "You think this is clever, human?" Kh'zix growled, his voice low and resonant. "You can run, but there is no escaping a Kazakh hunter." The trees offered no reply, only the faint sound of birds chirping and the occasional groan of a distant breeze. Kh'zix adjusted the settings on his scanners, amplifying his detection range. His patience, already frayed, began to wear thin. The human's casual arrogance gnawed at him. He paused by a shallow stream, his reflection distorted in the rippling water. For a moment he considered retreating to the valley's edge, where he could use his remaining traps to regain control of the situation. But no, retreat was an admission of weakness. He was Kh'zix, the greatest predator in the galaxy. This was his hunt. He would not be bested by a soft-skinned, coffee-drinking ape. A faint whistle drifted through the air, carrying a tune so light it could almost be mistaken for birdsong. Kh'zix's mandibles clicked as he pinpointed the direction. With silent precision, he moved toward the sound, his crystalline form blending with the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. The sound led him to a small clearing, where a crude shelter of branches and leaves stood. The whistle stopped as Kh'zix approached, and he crouched low, his glowing eyes scanning for movement. A figure sat cross-legged inside the shelter, back turned to him. Kh'zix tensed, his claws poised to strike. "Nice of you to drop by," Marcus said without turning around, his voice calm. "I was starting to think you'd gotten lost." Kh'zix froze, a growl rising in his throat. "You mock me again." Marcus stood slowly, brushing dirt off his pants. "Mocking you? Nah, I'm just having fun." He turned, holding up his hands. "See? No weapons, just me and my stupid human tricks." The hunter surged forward, his claws slicing through the air, but Marcus sidestepped with an ease that bordered on casual. Kh'zix's momentum carried him into the shelter, which collapsed around him in a cloud of dust and twigs. The crystalline predator spun around, his eyes blazing. "You cannot evade me forever," Kh'zix snarled, his voice echoing through the clearing. "Evading you? Who said anything about that?" Marcus replied from the edge of the trees, his grin faintly visible. "I'm just giving you the grand tour." Kh'zix lunged again, but Marcus darted into the shadows. As Kh'zix followed, the ground beneath him shifted. His sensors blared a warning a fraction too late, and he stumbled into a carefully placed snare made from vines and weighted rocks. The trap was primitive but effective, tangling around his legs and pulling him off balance. Kh'zix roared in frustration, slashing through the restraints. "That one's on the house," Marcus called, his voice teasing. "Don't worry, I've got plenty more." Kh'zix tore free, his breathing heavy. His crystalline exoskeleton gleamed with a faint iridescence as he recalibrated his sensory array. The human was deliberately leading him through the forest, turning the terrain itself into a weapon. The realization brought a surge of rage and, beneath it, an unfamiliar pang of unease. He activated his thermal scanners, sweeping the area for Marcus's heat signature. At first there was nothing, only the cold presence of rocks and trees. Then, faintly, He picked up a cluster of signals, several heat sources moving in unison. Kh'zix's mandibles twitched in confusion. Was Marcus not alone? Had he underestimated the human's allies? Curious, Kh'zix murmured, moving toward the signals with deliberate caution. The hunter in him relished the mystery, even as the uncertainty gnawed at his confidence. As he approached, the heat signatures resolved into several small piles of heated stones placed at strategic intervals. They radiated enough warmth to confuse his sensors, but nothing more. Another trap, this one designed to waste his time. "Enjoying yourself yet?" Marcus's voice came from above. Kh'zix looked up, his gaze scanning the treetops. There was nothing but branches swaying gently in the breeze. "You think your parlor tricks will stop me?" Kh'zix growled, his claws flexing. "I will find you, human, and when I do—" A small object dropped from above, landing at his feet with a soft thud. Kh'zix leapt back, ready to attack, but the object remained motionless. On closer inspection, he realized it was a bag of trail mix. Kh'zix stared at it, his neural processors briefly stalling. Attached to the bag was a note, written in looping, messy handwriting. "For the galaxy's greatest hunter. You're gonna need the energy. M." The crystalline predator's mandibles clicked audibly, a sound that could have been anger or amusement. He crushed the bag in one claw, scattering its contents across the forest floor. The sound of Marcus's laughter echoed through the trees, faint but maddeningly persistent. "This isn't a hunt," Kh'zix muttered to himself, his crystalline form shifting hues as his emotions churned. "This is a game." And yet deep down he knew the truth. Marcus was turning the hunt against him, forcing him into unfamiliar territory, not just the wilderness, but the psychological battlefield. Every step Kh'zix took, every decision he made felt anticipated, countered. For the first time in centuries, he was not the one in control. "You are clever," Kh'zix called, his voice resonating through the forest. "But cleverness will not save you. I am the apex predator, human. You are nothing more than prey." "I don't know," Marcus replied, his voice drifting from somewhere unseen. "You sure you've got the right roles here?" The words struck deeper than Kh'zix cared to admit. He was supposed to be the hunter, the master of the chase. But as he prowled through the forest, surrounded by traps and decoys, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was the one being toyed with. The shadows grew longer as the day waned, the forest bathed in the golden hues of twilight. Kh'zix paused on a rocky outcrop, scanning the terrain below. His sensors picked up faint movement, a flash of Marcus's jacket disappearing into a narrow ravine. "You're cornered now," Kh'zix growled, leaping from the outcrop and landing with a forceful thud. He raced into the ravine, his crystalline claws tearing through branches and underbrush. The ravine narrowed, the walls closing in around him. Kh'zix slowed, his instincts prickling. Something felt off, but he couldn't place it. The faint sound of running water reached his ears, masking other noises. He crouched low, his glowing eyes searching the dim passage ahead. A single voice cut through the stillness. "Welcome to the home stretch." Before Kh'zix could react, the ground beneath him gave way. He fell, landing hard in a shallow pit lined with reflective panels. The sudden light disoriented his sensors, and for a moment he struggled to regain his bearings. Above him, Marcus's silhouette appeared, backlit by the fading sunlight. "Not bad for a primitive, huh?" Marcus called down. "Guess that makes us even. Your move, big guy." Kh'zix clawed his way out of the reflective pit, his crystalline exoskeleton shimmering with the last traces of sunlight. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, the golden hues of twilight giving way to the cool blue of evening. His neural processors churned furiously, analyzing every misstep. The human was clever, infuriatingly so. But this was no longer just a hunt. It was a battle of wits, and Kh'zix was determined to reclaim control. From a ridge above, Marcus leaned casually against a tree, silhouetted against the fading light. His stance was relaxed, almost amused, his hands resting on his hips as he watched the Kh'zix predator scramble out of the pit. "You okay down there?" Marcus called out. his voice laced with faux concern. "That was supposed to be a quick detour, not a long stay," Kh'zix hissed, his mandibles flaring as he regained his footing. "You think this is a victory, human? You have done nothing but delay the inevitable." "Maybe," Marcus replied, shrugging. "But sometimes delaying is all you need. You ever heard of attrition?" Kh'zix's mandibles clicked as he scanned the area, his glowing eyes locking onto Marcus. He recalibrated his remaining weapons, a low hum emanating from his claws as he activated a paralysis field generator. Marcus tilted his head, watching the movement with an expression that was almost pitying. "You're running low, aren't you?" Marcus asked. "That hum's weaker than it was earlier. I'm guessing your fancy toys weren't built for long-term use." Kh'zix froze for a fraction of a second, the human's words cutting closer to the truth than he liked. His power reserves were dangerously depleted, his cloaking device already inactive to conserve energy. The extended pursuit had drained his systems more than he anticipated. "Your primitive assumptions amuse me," Kh'zix growled, stepping forward. "My technology is beyond your comprehension. Your tricks will not save you." Marcus grinned, a spark of challenge in his eyes. "You're right. I don't need tricks, just strategy." With that, he turned and disappeared into the shadows of the forest. Kh'zix roared in frustration, his voice reverberating through the trees as he gave chase. His claws carved into the dirt as he sprinted forward, his advanced sensors scanning every corner of the terrain. The forest seemed alive, conspiring against him. Branches snagged at his limbs, uneven ground slowed his steps, and every movement felt like a deliberate obstruction. Marcus's voice echoed through the darkness, bouncing off the trees in a way that made it impossible to pinpoint. "You know, for the galaxy's greatest hunter, you're awfully loud. Ever think about stealth?" Kh'zix growled, his crystalline form glinting faintly in the moonlight. "You talk as though you have already won, yet here I am, closing the distance with every step." "Sure," Marcus replied, his tone light. "But while you're closing the distance, let me ask you something. How much thought did you give to the terrain? Because this isn't just a forest, it's my classroom." The words struck like a pulse through Kh'zix's neural processors. He glanced around, his sensors picking up subtle changes in the environment. The ground beneath him was uneven, the rocks shifting under his weight. Branches hung lower here, their shadows casting long, jagged shapes across the ground. It was more than a forest. It was a trap, sculpted by a mind that understood every nuance of the landscape. "I have conquered labyrinths and mazes far more intricate than this," Kh'zix snarled, his voice a crystalline rasp. "Your forest holds no secrets from me." "Secrets? No, nothing like that," Marcus replied, his voice drifting closer. "But you're missing the point. It's not about the forest. It's about your assumptions." A faint click echoed through the trees, and Kh'zix's sensors picked up a small, sharp movement near his left flank. He pivoted instantly, claws ready to strike, but all he found was a tangle of vines swaying in the breeze. Another click sounded behind him, and he spun again, only to find the same empty shadows. The clicks grew louder, faster, creating an erratic rhythm that seemed to come from everywhere at once. His processors worked overtime, struggling to decipher the pattern, but every conclusion led to nothing. "Sounds funny like that, isn't it?" Marcus said, his voice now maddeningly close. "The way it bounces off these rocks? Did you know the indigenous tribes here use this trick to confuse predators?" "Thought you'd appreciate a little local history," Kh'zix roared, firing a paralysis beam into the darkness. The energy lanced through the trees, shattering a branch with a crack that echoed like thunder. The beam fizzled out, and Kh'zix felt the drain on his reserves. He was down to his last charge. "Temper, temper," Marcus quipped, his voice carrying an edge of mockery. "You keep firing like that, you'll be out of juice before we even get to the finale." Kh'zix's claws clenched, the faint hum of his depleted weapons a haunting reminder of how far this hunt had unraveled. He recalibrated his scanners again, this time focusing on infrared heat signatures. At first, he detected nothing, just the faint warmth of the forest floor. Then he found a cluster of heat sources moving in erratic patterns. The signals split, darting in different directions, each one leading deeper into the forest. "Decoys," Kh'zix muttered, his voice a low growl. "Childish tricks." But even as he said it, doubt crept in. His sensors were too drained to tell the difference between real and false signals, and every moment spent chasing a decoy was another step closer to exhaustion. He picked a direction and moved, his claws digging into the earth with every step. The heat signature grew stronger, and for a brief moment he felt a flicker of triumph, until he rounded the corner and found a small pile of heated rocks stacked neatly in a ring. Another note rested on top. "You're predictable. Try harder." Kh'zix crushed the rocks beneath his claws, his rage flaring like a nova. This was no longer a hunt, it was a humiliation. The human had turned his own strategies against him, exploiting every weakness, every oversight. For the first time in centuries, Kh'zix felt the sting of failure looming on the horizon. "I will not be defeated by prey," he snarled, his voice cracking with frustration. "Who said I was prey?" Marcus's voice came from behind him, startlingly close. Kh'zix spun around, claws raised, but Marcus was already gone, his laughter echoing through the trees like a ghost. The forest fell silent again, save for the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. Kh'zix stood motionless, his crystalline frame gleaming faintly in the moonlight. His breathing was heavy, his systems strained. Somewhere in the back of his mind, a thought emerged, one he did not want to confront. This human wasn't prey. He was a predator. And Kh'zix had walked straight into his den. The forest lay still, wrapped in the quiet embrace of the moonlit night. The only sound was the faint rustling of the trees, swaying in the mountain breeze. Kh'zix crouched in the shadows, his crystalline exoskeleton faintly aglow. His breathing was heavy, each inhalation rattling through his powerful frame. Every instinct screamed at him to regroup, to reassess, but pride and rage kept him moving forward. Somewhere nearby, Marcus Carter waited. The human had turned this hunt into a theater of humiliation, using every element of the forest to toy with Kh'zix. The hunter had underestimated his quarry, and now he was paying the price. But this wasn't over. Not yet. Kh'zix still had his claws, his strength, and the indomitable will of a Kazakh predator. He would end this, one way or another. "I commend your ingenuity, human," Kh'zix called out, his voice echoing through the trees. "You have proven resourceful, more so than I anticipated. But resourcefulness will not save you." Silence answered him, a silence so profound it seemed to press against his senses. It was the kind of silence that only came from careful deliberation, the kind crafted by a predator lying in wait. Kh'zix's claws flexed, his neural processors whirring as he scanned the darkness. And then, Marcus's voice broke the quiet, calm, and conversational. "You know what I've learned about predators? They get too comfortable. You've been at the top of the food chain so long you forgot what it's like to fight for your life." Kh'zix snarled, his mandibles clicking. "And you believe yourself my equal? You, with your primitive tools and fragile body?" "Not my equal," Marcus replied, his voice drifting from an indeterminate direction. "Your teacher," Kh'zix's mandibles flared in indignation. "Arrogant words for a creature moments away from defeat." "Funny," Marcus said, his tone light, almost amused. "I was about to say the same thing." Kh'zix spun, his sensors picking up a faint movement behind him. He lunged, claws slicing through the air, but all he hit was a thin line of vines stretched between two trees. As his claws snapped the vines, they triggered a mechanism hidden in the foliage. A cascade of rocks tumbled down, forcing him to leap aside. The rocks missed him by inches, but the sudden movement drained more of his already depleted energy reserves. The sound of Marcus's laughter echoed through the night. "You're predictable, big guy. All power, no subtlety." Kh'zix rose to his full height, his crystalline frame casting fractured patterns of moonlight across the forest floor. "Enough of your games," he growled. "Face me, or admit your cowardice." "I'll face you," Marcus said, his voice closer now. "But let me ask you something first. How's that exoskeleton holding up? Pretty advanced tech, I'm guessing." Strong. Durable. Kh'zix stiffened, his sensors scanning the area as Marcus continued speaking. Thing is, strong and durable doesn't mean much if you're up against someone who knows how to exploit the cracks. Before Kh'zix could respond, Marcus stepped into view. He stood atop a rocky outcrop silhouetted against the night sky. His posture was relaxed, his hands resting casually at his sides. He held no weapons, carried no tools. He simply stood there, looking down at Kh'zix with an expression of quiet confidence. "You think you understand me," Kh'zix said, his voice low and dangerous. "But you do not. I am the apex predator. I have hunted across 17 star systems, claimed trophies from creatures far more dangerous than you." Marcus tilted his head, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Dangerous? Sure. But adaptable? That's a different story." The human's words ignited a fresh wave of anger in Kh'zix, and he charged, his claws tearing through the underbrush. He moved with blinding speed, his powerful frame bearing down on Marcus like an avalanche. But just as he reached the outcrop, Marcus stepped back, vanishing into the shadows. Kh'zix skidded to a halt, his claws gouging deep furrows in the rock. He spun, his sensors flaring as he searched for Marcus. The human had disappeared again, leaving nothing but the faint rustle of leaves in his wake. "Where are you?" Kh'zix roared, his voice reverberating through the forest. "Right here," Marcus replied, his voice coming from above. Kh'zix looked up just in time to see Marcus drop from a tree, landing lightly on his feet. The human moved with practiced ease, circling Kh'zix like a wolf sizing up its prey. "Here's the thing about humans," Marcus said, his voice steady. "We're not the strongest. We're not the fastest. But we're relentless. And when we're up against something we don't understand, we adapt." Kh'zix lashed out, his claws swiping through the air, but Marcus was already moving, ducking under the strike with fluid precision. The human's movements were calculated, deliberate, each one designed to conserve energy while forcing Kh'zix to expend his. "You've been running on instinct this whole time," Marcus said, his voice calm. "But instinct only gets you so far. Out here, it's not about who's stronger. It's about who's smarter." Kh'zix roared, lunging again, but Marcus sidestepped, his movements almost taunting. The crystalline predator's strikes grew slower, less precise, as exhaustion began to take hold. His once dazzling exoskeleton now appeared dull, the energy reserves that powered its brilliance nearly spent. "This isn't possible," Kh'zix growled, his voice heavy with disbelief. "You are nothing but a primitive." "Primitive?" Marcus repeated, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Maybe, but let me tell you something about us primitives. We survive, no matter what." As if to punctuate his words, Marcus darted forward, his hand striking a panel on Kh'zix's side. The impact was precise, targeting a vulnerable junction in the predator's exoskeleton. Sparks flew as Kh'zix stumbled, his systems briefly flickering. "You studied me," Kh'zix said, his voice laced with a mix of frustration and awe. "You've been studying me this entire time." Marcus nodded, stepping back to give Kh'zix room to recover. "That's what we do. We observe, we learn, and then we turn what we've learned into action." Kh'zix straightened, his glowing eyes locking onto Marcus. "This changes nothing. You may have delayed the inevitable, but I will not be defeated." "Maybe not," Marcus said, his expression softening. "But here's the thing. You're not the hunter anymore. You're the student. And class is over." With that, Marcus turned and walked away, his figure disappearing into the forest. Kh'zix stood motionless, his crystalline frame catching the faint glow of dawn breaking over the horizon. For the first time in his life, the greatest predator in the galaxy felt something he couldn't process: respect, and perhaps a touch of gratitude.